Welcome back to Peril Pending, where today we're looking at boomers. As I was clicking about the internet, I came across this short little video from BBC Radio 4, where a boomer and another boomer, maybe the generation just after boomers, can't quite remember, discuss if boomers are the luckiest generation, and surprising absolutely nobody, the boomer doesn't think so and has a lot of unusual reasons as to why. Let's give it a watch.
Look at us. Are we part of the luckiest generation ever to have lived?
Yes. The answer to that question is yes.
I'm going to read you one email. My favourite. John, it sounds like we're due to be treated to another chapter in the Evan Davis campaign against the older generation and their pensions. When will the BBC curb his one-sided vendetta, which serves only to provoke a generational divide at a time when we can do without more division in our society? And he is right, isn't he, in that there has been a sort of generational divide.
There has definitely been an argument about
This chap here, Evan Davis. Good grief. You're going to hear some rather infuriating reasons as to why apparently, even though he was able to go to university for free and even though he was able to get a house with no mortgage, apparently it doesn't mean that he was lucky at all because, well, you'll see.
this, and there has been a generational divide, and yes, there are loads of people wanting to stir it up. I hope my article was a balanced
It's really not.
BBC content, and I actually was focusing more, my thoughts, not on what has been the classic argument, boomers.
Yes, see, that's how he calls his article balanced, because he wasn't taking into account the actual arguments, the actual facts, the questions people genuinely have. He was just looking at it from his boomer perspective.
It's the post-war baby boom generation, born between about 46 and 62. About them snatching everything for themselves, which is the claim often made. I was focusing.
No, it's not the claim that's made. It's not that they were snatching everything for themselves. It's that they got given everything. They're the most entitled generation, and then as they grew up, they pulled the ladder up. They didn't snatch it all. They were given it all, which is fair. Give it to the younger generations. But then as you got older, you took that ability away from future generations.
On a slightly narrower claim, actually, which was interestingly made by William Hague, who's now Chancellor of Oxford University, who said the early 60s, when you and I were born, Sarah.
Me slightly late.
Okay, sorry, slightly later in your part.
Just every year counts.
that period was the best period ever.
So you weren't really answering the question about boomers then, were you? You were going back to your parents' generation. Yeah, because if you were born then doesn't really... Yeah, that doesn't even... Yeah, you've changed the goalposts.
Have been born.
We should say we're talking about England, and you pick three areas.
Yeah, which had been, I think, areas of contention in sort of, have the boomers had it too lucky?
And the one that comes up a lot on our news programmes is that of student loans.
Yeah, and a lot of students today say you didn't have
Yeah, you're going to want to buckle up for this one.
To pay, and we didn't have to pay. Maybe no, you didn't have to pay. In fact, the government helped you go to university by giving you a bit of a means-tested grant. I don't think that one works in the kind.
Yes, see, let's listen to the boomer about how not having student debt saddled to you for the rest of your life, that actually isn't a benefit
Of underprivileged millennials and Gen Z, because in our generation, we were lucky because we went to uni. But, 90%.
It wasn't about luck. You didn't need to secure any funding. They just sort of give you it. And also, you didn't have to go to university. You weren't told that if you go to university, that's how you get the higher paying jobs. That's how you get hired with a degree. When you were a boomer, You could work as a police officer, as a member of the fire service, just as a shopkeep, and you earned enough to have a life, to be able to save up for a home, to be able to purchase a car, to be able to go on holiday, to be able to start a family. You didn't have to go to university.
People didn't. And, so the unlucky people were actually our classmates who didn't even have a choice to borrow money and go to university. They just were told university.
Yeah, but it wasn't really borrowing money though, was it? Because you didn't have to pay it back. So it wasn't, you were just given it.
Is a rather small elite niche route and never got to go. Now, of course, we're up to sort of 50%ish of state school students.
Yes, because all these companies that, if they were around when you were of university age, you could start, as they say, in the mailroom, and you could work up all the way onto the board. These days, if you start in the mailroom, that's it. You might be able to get 1 or 2 levels up, but there's a ceiling unless you have a piece of paper that says you spent 3 years studying X or Y. You didn't have to do that with your generation. And also, if you wanted to stay on level 1 or 2, or even in the mailroom, you earned enough to have a life. You didn't have to climb that ladder, but at least you had a ladder. That isn't there anymore.
Are going to university by the age of 25. Obviously, if you're going to grow the numbers by that volume, someone's got to pay for it. And that's why we have a student loan system now, and we didn't have it in our day. But I think that participation rate in university makes it much harder to say that this generation have it bad relative to our generation.
I'm afraid you're just wrong there. Just because more people go to university now than did when it was your time, that doesn't mean that the boomers didn't have it better. Once again, people coming out of university now are saddled with debt pretty much for their entire life. Pretty much. It's an education tax, well, especially here in the UK. And when you get out of university, unlike what was promised and unlike what was a reality for yourself, it's not a guarantee of a job. It's definitely not a guarantee of a higher paying job. It's something you're told to get in order to achieve this higher paying job. But then when you come out, here's reality. These jobs just don't exist. And don't even get me started on AI.
Overall.
House buying.
Yeah.
And goodness, that, on the face of it, extraordinary difference. People now trying to get on the housing ladder.
Yes, but let's see if he admits that this is a benefit of being a boomer, or if he comes up with some other convoluted answer as to why actually he had it much tougher.
Ladder have it so much tougher.
It definitely, we can see the ability to buy a home in a reasonably well-paying job in your 20s.
Oh God, he's struggling. He's saying so many words other than just saying, yeah, it was easier for me, and it sucks that it's hard for future generations.
Was something that you could do when, around I was doing that in the 80s. You couldn't do it, and it's much harder to do now. Now, on this one, I think it is fair to say that a lot of this, it is a national story, but a lot of this story is particularly focused on London and the South.
You would say that. I imagine you're from London, but you're wrong. It's countrywide.
Southeast. If you bought a place in London or travel to work area around London, and you did that before 1995, you did have a lucky break because prices exploded. London, which was basically a declining city when I left university, it had been depopulating. The word inner city was considered a kind of a...
What are you talking about here? This is just waffle. The answer is yes, it was far easier. There were even mortgages that were, negative 25%? So not only did the bank give you enough to buy the home, they then give you a little extra on top to get things going. Now, that's just never going to happen. Come on, buddy, it's fine to say you had it easier. Stop with all this convoluted London-centric crap.
a derogatory word for the degraded circumstances of living in the city. Beyond 95, though, London is back. It's booming. It's a world city, or becomes a world city, where people from all over want to move in, and prices exploded. But let's remember, Sarah, not everybody bought a place, and not everybody bought a place in London South East.
Yeah, or at the right time, because remember that.
Right, but just because people didn't buy a place doesn't mean that it wasn't easier. These people who didn't buy a place, I'm sure, if they could tell the future, they would have bought somewhere. Sorry, this doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about?
Early 90s, interest rates shot up at one point.
Early 90s, it was very painful. Very painful to a generation.
Up to 15% or something.
Yeah. So outside of London, the story is much less clear-cut.
So lucky on university.
No, it's not. Outside of London, prices for homes still were low and then went through the roof for every other generation.
Lucky on house buying. And then pensions.
The boomer generation, I think, did have it a bit lucky on pensions because they...
Oh, right, there we go. You're allowed one. He admitted one thing.
They got better pensions than their parents. And I think they got better pensions than their children are going to get. So essentially they were kind of, we'll get our kids to pay us when we're retired. We'll get our kids to pay us more than we paid our mum and dad. And our kids will probably be paying more than their kids will pay them. So it comes through in various ways. You're probably thinking triple lock. And a lot of the people who wrote were saying, you've got a campaign against the triple lock. Actually, it's not the triple lock.
It is the triple lock.
It was the existence for a generation of defined benefit or, gold-plated pensions, employer-based pensions that guarantee you a certain income. There was a backup scheme called SERPs, the State Earnings Related Pension Scheme, for people who didn't have their own employer scheme.
That doesn't exist anymore. Why is he even talking about this?
Or they wanted to be in the state scheme rather than the employer scheme. SERPs, though, which ran from 1978 to 2002, was unaffordable. I think it was, by the end, it was...
So what's the point in talking about this? Why are you bringing this point up? It's completely moot.
Abolished because everyone acknowledged it was an unaffordable scheme. So that, again, if you like, was a kind of boomer generation pension provision, unaffordable, and has been scrapped. But again, your point, Sarah, is bang on. It's just like I went to university, most of my peers didn't. I bought a place in London.
You went to university, most of your peers didn't. Most of your peers didn't have to. You were able to live, work, start a family, buy a home on an average wage. I think a lot of people, myself included, wouldn't have gone to university if that was the case. But I know for myself, anecdotally, I was taught that I had to go. And that's how you get a higher paying job.
Most people didn't.
This point about buying a home in London is that's just complete nonsense. House prices everywhere were really good for the boomers and then really bad for everybody else.
I have a lovely defined benefit employer pension, but most people didn't.
Right, but again, there's the triple lock. I know you said that doesn't matter. Of course you would. But what is this point?
That's why my conclusion is not that the late boomers, our generation, were a lucky generation. It's that it was a very good time to be lucky. There were some very lucky breaks that were handed out to a minority of that generation, of whom from which I benefited. But I think it's really important, and really important for people to understand the argument, which is stop thinking about this generation versus that generation. There are winners and losers within each generation.
Yes, but most of the winners sit in the boomer generation. And the fact that, as you've just proven here, you're unable to simply admit that you had it better and that it's been far more difficult for every other generation is what's causing people to have this versus mentality. Because you're still adamant, like a lot of them are, obviously not all, that you just, I was just a little bit lucky, or I actually just worked harder. You got everything handed to you. You're the most entitled generation, and then you pulled up the ladder. This is just a fact. Maybe the versus mentality would stop if, I don't know, you were to admit that and maybe help fix the problems that your generation caused. I don't know.